Shalom. Welcome. I'm Rabbi Scott with Beth Yeshua Messianic Synagogue in Fort Myers, Florida. We are reissuing the Revelation series that was taught by Rabbi Jim Pickens here at Beth Yeshua over the course of the last 2 years or so. We feel these messages are especially relevant in these tumultuous times, and we hope and pray that Adonai uses them to strengthen you and to encourage you. If you are currently a supporter of this ministry, we would like to say thank you. We appreciate your partnership with us as we all labor together in the work of the gospel of Yeshua in the kingdom here on earth. If you would like to support us, you will find a link below in the video description. Once again, we hope that this is a blessing to you. If you have any questions, you will find an email address. If you have any dialogue or discussion, you'll find an email address in the video description below. Please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you. And now I will give you the Revelation series with Rabbi Jim Pickens. Shalom.
Well, good evening. Last time we met, which was last week, I gave you this incredibly complex teaching that was intended to reconcile the four beasts, empires of man, three beasts of Revelation 13, the seven heads with crowns, hills/kings, the 10 horns with crowns and kings, and the little horn who became an eighth horn. Everybody get that? I think most of you all said to me at one point, we understand this. So my question is, how many of us are ready for a quiz on this now? How many of us took 15 minutes to review any of this past week? We've got to know this information. This is just information that we really have to know. It's going to come up again in Revelation chapter 17. If we let this get away from us now, we will be absolutely lost when we get into Revelation chapter 17. Review this chart, this main chart here, if you can, every day for about 15 minutes for a week. Really to get it implanted in our minds. Some of you are quicker, can review it in 5 minutes. Anyway, the thing I want to impress on everybody is let's get this down cold. We won't take the time, we can't take the time to reteach all of this basic information every time we have to reference to it. Now, we will need to apply this introductory information to what we're going to be reading into as we go through this chapter 13. So, tighten your seat belts, and we'll begin by reading these 4 verses that we looked at last week. Revelation 13, 1 through 4, please. And I saw a beast come up out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads. On its horns were 10 royal crowns, and on its heads blasphemous names. The beast which I saw was like a leopard, but with feet like those of a bear, and a mouth like a mouth of a lion. To it the dragon gave its power, its throne, and great authority. One of the heads of the beast appeared to have received a fatal wound, but its fatal wound was healed, and the whole world, the whole earth, followed after the beast in amazement. They worshipped the dragon because he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast? Who can fight against it?" Notice the transition in the reference to the beast. The dragon stood by the seashore at the end of chapter 12, and then John in chapter 13 says he saw the beast come up out of the sea. The sea here is the mass of humanity that inhabits the world. I want to impress that on us. The sea here is the mass of humanity that inhabits the world. This is speaking to the rise of the fourth kingdom or empire of man. It's speaking to its inception, really, at the rise of the Roman Empire. It's a historic event, or that's a historic event from our perspective. The fact that it includes the 7 heads, note those on the chart, first through the 7th heads, points to its historical significance. However, the 10 horns, which are the 10 kings, if we look at down here, are still in our future. They're still prophetic, pointing to what's coming in our future. But as we looked at last week, the 10 horns or heads are even now in the process of forming. What this sentence does is tie the beginning and the ending of the fourth empire of man together. A period beginning with Rome, continuing like a chameleon until the rise of the false Messiah. Verse 2 describes this beast, the fourth empire, how it retains characteristics of the previous three empires, how it is the creation of and is empowered by the adversary, by Hasatan. To it the dragon gives its power, its throne. That is, it is through Satan that the ruler will be placed over this empire. It is through Satan that his authority will come. Just as an interesting side note, the greatest kings over the first three empires came with the inception of those first three empires. They came at their beginning. Nebuchadnezzar came and established, was at the beginning of the first empire. We're looking at Babylon. Darius or Cyrus came and established Medo-Persia. Alexander the Great was the third one, and this was the Greek Empire. But here, in this fourth empire, the false Messiah, the greatest ruler over the fourth empire, doesn't come and establish himself until at the end of this fourth empire's life. Verse 3 transitions us from the fourth beast, the empire, to the first beast of Revelation 13. That is the false Messiah, one of the seven heads of the beast. In fact, I believe the seventh head, the last head that receives the fatal wound, this head is the false Messiah. We've moved from talking about an empire to talking about a man when we get to this. A man who will counterfeit what Yeshua did at Pesach, at Passover. And he receives a fatal wound. Fatal means dead. He receives a wound that kills him, but this wound is healed, and he is raised from the dead. That's important to note. He is raised from the dead. And he is counterfeiting with all this what Yeshua did at the Passover. And the whole earth follows this resurrected beast, the false Messiah, in amazement. Some will try to say, oh, well, he didn't die. An extraordinary example of modern medicine was what saved him from death. But think about it. This is hardly the kind of a sign and miracle that would cause the whole world to stop what they're doing and follow after someone. And you hear people saying, I'm going to follow after and worship this man because Dr. Snifferwitz and his medical team was able to save his life. Get real. All signs of prophecy seem to point to this being at the midpoint of the tribulation period, at the 3.5-year point, which, if Yeshua's return, his reign, is pictured at Sukkot, and Rosh Hashanah announces the beginning of the 7-year period, then the Passover is at the 3.5-year point. That's what would be 3.5 years into this. And it appears to be the time of this counterfeit death and resurrection. It would also appear that this will involve a man of some great fame and notoriety. I want us to think about that. This will appear, or this appears to me at least, to be the time of the counterfeit death of resurrection, and that would be involving a man of some great fame or notoriety. For to get the media coverage necessary to propel the whole world into worshiping of this individual, it's got to be something that's of someone that has a certain amount of fame. If this happens on the quiet, the whole world is likely not to react. The media is not likely to feature this happening to somebody named Joe Snerdley as opposed to somebody famous. So I'm saying that this is probably somebody famous, probably somebody that may already be involved in world politics today. We'll just have to wait and see how that works out. This also raises the point that the media plays an important part in this event, as they do in the coverage of the two witnesses' death and resurrection. If this follows the same pattern of resurrection as the 3 days after death for Yeshua and 3 days after the death of the two witnesses, this man, whoever he is that will end up being the false Messiah, could then be lying in state somewhere in some world capital with TV cameras trained on the casket, when 3 days after 3 days he suddenly opens the lid and climbs out. That would get some attention. My weird sense of humor catches up with me here, and I wonder if the false Messiah, when he climbs out of the casket, will continue on with embalming fluid in his veins. Just a curiosity that my mind jumped to. When he comes back to life, the world will worship him. They will worship the dragon, because the dragon has given his authority to the false Messiah, who is the beast. I can just imagine the false Messiah stands up alive after the world has pronounced and accepted him as dead and says, "It is through the morning star." The morning star is a name that is given to the false Messiah in Isaiah 14:12, if you want to look that up, Isaiah 14:12, where it's describing him. And it says that I'm alive. And they will worship this false Messiah, and they will worship Satan, and they will say, "Who is like this Messiah? Who can stand against him?" Pictured in these words is a zealousness. People who have zeal for their religion tend to go to great extents to move that religion forward. The Muslims, for instance, among the most zealous, have the attitude of convert or die. Those with great zeal also tend to have an attitude that they will die for their faith. This will be during a time unprecedented, when the world becomes dominated by a single religion. There'll be pockets of other faiths that will be left, probably those left who want to profess no religious faith, but the majority of the world, by the time this happens and this false Messiah comes back from the dead, will be sold out to the false Messiah and to Satan, their morning star, and zealous for the false Messiah, probably clinging to every word that he says. So with that in mind, let's then pick this up where we left off. We've left off with Revelation 13, 1 through 4. Let's pick this up in Revelation 13, 5, if you will. It was given a mouth speaking arrogant blasphemies, that's speaking of the false Messiah. It was given authority to act for 42 months, that's 3.5 years. So it opened its mouth in blasphemies against God to insult his name and his Shekinah, his glory, and those living in heaven. It was allowed to make war on God's holy people and to defeat them. It was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. Everyone living on earth will worship it, except those whose names are written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb slaughtered before the world was founded. Let's read that verse 8 again. Everyone living on earth will worship it, except those whose names are written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb slaughtered before the world was founded. That's Yeshua. Verse 9, those who have ears, let them hear. If anyone is meant for captivity, into captivity he goes. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he is to be killed. This is when God's holy people must persevere and trust. Revelation 13, verses 5 through 10 here is giving us a picture of the false Messiah. This will be a time of ultimate testing of people's faith and allegiance. See what that last sentence in verse 10 is saying? This is when God's holy people must persevere and trust. Marginal believers will find questions posed in their minds, I believe. They'll be thinking of things like, what am I to believe? What I see with my own eyes, or something written down in an ancient book of myths where only faith and trust is involved? Particularly, they'll be that way about the Bible if they've been taught that certain portions of the Bible no longer apply. Understand that there are great parts of the body of Messiah that will tell you today that there are things in the Old Testament that are no longer applicable. And they will say that it is impossible to understand some of the other portions of the Bible, that's what they've been taught. But, most particularly, most of these will have never studied the Bible for themselves. I think this will create a really great falling away, particularly if the promised rapture hasn't occurred. That old saw that seeing is believing will be very, very popular at that time. Look at what God says He's going to allow the false Messiah to do at this time. Always remember that Hasatan, Satan, cannot give any authority to the false Messiah that God Himself doesn't allow. Let's embed that in our mind also, that Satan cannot give any authority to the false Messiah that God Himself doesn't allow him to do this. He, false Messiah, will be given a mouth speaking arrogant blasphemies, we're told. You know that the false Messiah is going to believe all this himself. He believes, I believe, he will believe that he is the Savior of the earth. He is an extension of his God, who is Satan, the adversary, who has brought him back from death and given him life. So of course he's going to be arrogant. Of course he'll blaspheme that impotent God of Israel. But God will allow this only 42 months. God will only allow this to take place for 42 months, the same period of time that faithful Israel is where Satan can't lay a finger on them. God will allow this for 42 months, that same period of time that faithful Israel is where Satan can't lay a finger on them. See, God is purging the world with this final demonic invasion led by Satan and his false Messiah. They're going to be pulling those not sealed with the seal of God into their grasp. Let's go to Zechariah 13, 8 and 9, please. In time, throughout the land, says Adonai, 2/3 of those in it will be destroyed. The land we're talking about here is Israel. We're talking about this coming of the end of the age when all this that we're looking at is going down. In time throughout that land, Israel, says Adonai, 2/3 of those in it will be destroyed. They will die. But 1/3 will remain. That 1/3, that's Adonai, will bring through the fire. I will refine them as silver is refined. I will test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them. I will say, this is my people, and they will say, Adonai is my God. God will be purging the world. Think about this. This speaks to the end of the purging. All that are left on the earth probably are going to be faithful to God through Messiah. The rest will have been taken out, just like it is here in Israel at this time. It'll be, the only ones who are left will be like Noah and his family are the only ones left on the earth at the end of the flood, the rest having been taken out. So think about this. This is not a good deal to be taken out. It's not going to be a good deal to be taken out first. Those that are left are the ones that God has sealed to himself. Like Noah again. Noah was sealed to himself. This third that remains here that God brings through the fire, this of Israel, are refined and tested like purest silver and gold. And God says, this is my people, the ones that are left. And they say that Adonai is my God. Understand that when we have somebody speaking to us in the Old Testament, it is probably pre-incarnate Yeshua. Because as we read through Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning was Elohim. Elohim is plural. And then the rest of chapter 1, verses 2 and 3 describes not only that it's God the Father and also the Son and also the Holy Spirit, if we break it down. Anyhow, this third that remain here that God brings through the fire, refined and tested like the purest gold, God says, this is my people, and they say, Adonai is my God. These will rule with Messiah for 1,000 years, while those taken out early will be the ones that await the lake of fire. Revelation 3:17, and pay close attention to what this is saying, Revelation 13:7. It was allowed, that's the false Messiah, that's really could be also Satan and the false Messiah. It was allowed to make war on God's holy people and defeat them, and was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nation. It was allowed to make war on God's holy people and defeat them. Now, that doesn't make any sense at all. That makes Scripture argue with itself. God has placed Israel in a safe place where Satan can't get to her. What the Greek actually says that has a subtle difference to the translation that we're reading. What the Greek actually says has a subtle difference to the translation that we're reading. We have to be careful with translations because translations often reflect the theology of the translators. Let me read us a direct translation. I'm going to do this through 2 sections, explaining each section. I'm going to begin by quoting here. It says, and was given to it war to make with the saints. The Greek here really gives us a list of things that the false Messiah is given to do. Here's how that list reads without a lot of explanation. Quote, and it was given to it a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, end quote. That's one of the things that the false Messiah has to do. Speak great things and blasphemies. He already has a mouth, that's standard issue for all human beings. I've got one, you've got one, he'll have one. He was given prophetically this to do. He has to do it. We have to see that. Next it says, and was given to it authority to act months 42. That's how long he, the false Messiah, is given to do this. How long he has to do this for. Speak great things and blasphemies. He has to do this for 42 months. Then it tells us he will do just that, and he will do it right up to the bitter end when he's unloaded. He, false Messiah, has to do this. This is what is given to him to do by God. It's given to him like a chore. Reading on in the Greek, he's given another chore. Verse 7 again, quote, and it was given to it war to make with the saints. And it was given to it war to make with the saints. It's kind of an interesting way that is stated. It was given to it war to make with the saints. It doesn't say it was that he was made to make war with the saints. It was given to him this kind of an option. This is something the false Messiah is supposed to do as part of his job as false Messiah. Make war with those who are professing the God of Israel through Messiah Yeshua. This is something that he is given to do. Who has the authority to give him this chore? Only God. And remember what God is saying in Zechariah 13, 8 and 9. Let's have that again, please, if you will. In time throughout the land, says Adonai, 2/3 of those and it will be destroyed. They will die, but 1/3 will remain. That third part I will bring through the fire, refine them as silver is refined, test them as gold is tested. They will call on my name, and I will answer them, and I will say, this is my people, and they will say, my God. 2/3 of those in the land, as we get to this time, are not going to be there anymore. They're going to be taken away. Who's going to take them away? The false Messiah's incursion is that fire that is brought on the people of Israel, taking away those who don't accept Yeshua as Messiah, but purifying that third of Israel that Adonai will bring through that same fire refined as pure gold, with 2/3 of them. 2/3 of them will not be with us any longer. The final part of Revelation 13:7 in the Greek says, and to overcome them. It does not say will overcome. It says to overcome them, not will overcome them. He's going to be given the job to overcome them, but he will not overcome those that are faithful to God through Messiah. The whole verse reads again, and it was given to it, false Messiah, war to make with the saints, comma, and to overcome them. But they can't, but he can't. What did Yeshua say about this? Let's go to Matthew 24:23, please. At time, if anyone says to you, look, here's the Messiah, or there he is, don't believe him. For there will appear false messiahs and false prophets performing great miracles, amazing things, so as to fool even the chosen, if possible. There, I have told you in advance. The English has been smoothed out by most translators here to help us understand it better. The job of the representatives of the false Messiah and the false prophet, the job of these representatives that the false Messiah and the false prophet send out will be to try and deceive those that believe in the God of Israel through Messiah Yeshua. The operative word here is try. And they will be successful. I think they will be successful only to the point, I think, that the marginal and Messiah will fall away. Many of those claiming the faith in God of Israel will not have a sufficient foundation in their faith to be able to hold on to it. And it will be taken, that faith, and them, by the false Messiah to his God. It's not a good idea to be among those that are taken. The ones that remain are the ones who will rule with Messiah for 1,000 years. Verse 36. Let's go to Matthew 24:36 through 39, if you will. But when that day and hour will come, no one knows, not the angels in heaven, not the Son, only the Father. For the Son of Man's coming will be just as it was in the days of Noah. Back then, before the flood, the people were eating and drinking, taking wives and becoming wives, right up till the day Noah entered the ark. And they didn't know what was happening until the flood came and swept them all away. It will be just like that when the Son of Man comes. Who is being swept away? Taken out? All of the idolaters. No one but the idolaters. Those like righteous Noah and his family, all that remain on the earth, saved by being a special place when the flood was poured out. What special place were those? They were on the ark. What did it say about the righteous Israel in Revelation 12:15? It says, the serpent spewed water like a river out of its mouth after the woman in order to sweep her away in the flood. The serpent, Revelation tells us, when he is cast down to earth, is going to try to do away with Israel. And what's going to be left is the righteous Israel. and he's going to do it by trying to cause a flood, if you will. Now, where is righteous Israel? Let's go to verses 13 and 14, 12, 13, and 14 again. When the dragon saw that he'd been hurled down to the earth, he went in pursuit of the woman who had given birth to the male child. That's when he's trying to inundate her. But the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle so she could fly to her place in the desert, where she is taken care of for a season, 2 seasons, a half a season, away from the servant's presence. So she is taken to a special place, out away from the civilizations of the area in the desert, where she is taken care of for 3.5 years. God will place righteous Israel in a safe place where the flood that is poured out by Satan cannot overwhelm them. Back to Matthew 24:36 again, please. But when that day and that hour comes, no one will know, not the angels in heaven, not the Son, only the Father. For the Son of Man's coming will be just as it was in the days of Noah. Back then, before the flood, people went on eating and drinking, taking wives and becoming wives, right up till the day Noah entered the ark. And they didn't know what was happening until the flood came and swept them all away. It will be just like that when the Son of Man comes. The coming of the Son of Man will be just like it was in the times of Noah. What was it like in the times of Noah? The righteous were placed in a safe place where the flood could not overwhelm them. They were placed in the ark. They remained alive on the earth, in the ark, afloat over the flood. Who was taken? Who was swept away? All of the idolaters were taken by the adversary, swept away. Let's look again at that last sentence in verse 39. It will be just like that when the Son of Man comes. Think about this carefully. It will be just like that when the Son of Man comes. Some will be in a safe place. What is that safe place? Sealed to God. How are we sealed to God? Through Messiah Yeshua. Being sealed to God is our safe place. Messiah Yeshua really, for all intents and purposes, has become our ark. Others will choose to follow the false Messiah, fooled by what their eyes see. They will have no safe place when the wrath of God falls. Satan and his false Messiah being instruments of that wrath. Those that don't have the seal of God will be swept away by them, taken out. Those who have the seal of God will remain safe in their ark being, again, Messiah. It'll be rough, tossed around on this flood, and we're promised that. Will some perish? Perhaps, but only physically. You see, they can't lay a finger on our eternal presence. They can't lay a finger on our eternity in the presence of God, who gets to stay around and rule with the Messiah for 1,000 years. Those that aren't taken, like those that weren't taken in Noah's flood. Let's look at some examples of who this will be. Matthew 24:40 and 41. Then there will be 2 men in a field. One will be taken and the other left. Verse 41. Then there will be 2 women grinding flour at the mill. One will be taken and the other left behind. Who is taken first is the question here. Hold your place. Go to Matthew 13:24 through 30. Yeshua put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. While people were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads of grain, the weeds also appeared, and the owner's servants came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where have the weeds come from? He answered, The enemy has done this. His servant said, Then do you want us to go and pull them up? And he said, No, because if you pull up the weeds, you might uproot some of the wheat at the same time. let them both grow together until the time of the harvest. At harvest time I will tell the reapers to collect the weeds first and tie them in bundles to be burned, but to gather the wheat into my barn. The reapers are going to be the harvesting angels. Isn't that interesting? When the Son of Man returns at his harvest, who is the first that is taken? The bad seed, the weeds, who are burned up. The wrath of the harvester applied to them for growing in his field. Once this takes place, who is left for the harvest? The good seed. We can take this back to 2/3 of Israel are taken out, but 1/3 remains. Who is left after the harvest? The good seed, the wheat, who are taken and stored in his barn for safety. One man is taken, one is left. One woman is taken, one is left. It's not a good deal to be taken away. What I want us to do is to see the connection in all of these things that we're being given here constantly by God through the Old Testament and then again with Messiah Yeshua. What is going to be brought on the earth by Satan through his false Messiah and false prophet and all their representatives is designed to sweep away anyone who is not sealed to God through his Messiah. And there will be war to make with the saints. Think about this. Satan, through his false Messiah and false prophets and all representatives, is designed to sweep away anyone who is not sealed to God through his Messiah. And there will be given war to the false Messiah to make with the saints. This is speaking of spiritual warfare, not physical warfare. Spiritual warfare, not physical warfare. So intense, as Yeshua tells us, as to be possible to fool some that are claiming to be following Messiah today. To overcome them, Revelation 13:7 tells us the question boils down to which Messiah will be chosen to be followed. The question boils down at the end of the age as to which Messiah will be chosen to follow, the false Messiah or the true Messiah. Zechariah seems to indicate that 2/3 of Israel, the people of God, will choose to follow the false Messiah all the way to his false God, while 1/3 will follow Yeshua, Messiah Yeshua, to the God of Israel. Those that choose the false Messiah and his God are taken out, as in the flood of Noah, as in the parable of the weeds and the wheat. The righteous that choose the God of Israel through Messiah Yeshua remain. And think about this. At some point when he's thrown out of heaven, the false Messiah is given the whole world to try and do this in. This is a worldwide project for him to complete in 42 months and 3.5 years. And it will be filled with people who will ultimately follow him and people who will ultimately be faithful to God through Messiah. Revelation 13:8 then tells us that everyone in the world will worship him, the false Messiah, except those that are written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb who was slaughtered before the world was founded. How can this be? Well, remember how Revelation chapter 12 opens with great signs? Revelation 12, 1 through 5, please. Now a great sign was seen in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, under her feet the moon, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and gave birth, and she screamed in the agony of labor. Another sign was seen in heaven. There was a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 royal crowns. Its tail swept a third of the stars out of heaven and threw them down to earth. It stood in front of the woman about to give birth so it might devour the child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, the one who will rule all the nations with an iron staff, but her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. Awful lot said in that. But it's basically that he can't lay a finger on the Messiah and those that follow him. These signs were all seen in heaven, the ones we've just looked at. Why are signs given? Good question. Why are signs given? The signs are given to show power. Signs are given to show the power of someone's ability to effect something. They're also given for prophecy. I think these signs were given in heaven before the world was founded. I think what we're just looking up there that was given to us in verse 12 were given to those that were in heaven, the angelic beings, even the demons and even Satan himself, before the world was formed. To those in heaven as a preview of what was coming, and who had the power to ultimately affect the outcome. And these great signs, it shows that the Lamb was slain and assuming power beside the throne of God, while the adversary, the dragon, assumes his power base on the environs of the earth. Think about this. In these great signs, it shows the Lamb being slain and assuming power beside the throne of God. Yeshua was slain. He was placed in the tomb. After 3 days, he was resurrected, and he ultimately raised himself, or was raised up before the throne of God. While the adversary, when we get to the end of the age, the dragon will assume his power base in the environs of the earth. During this final 3.5 years, we're going to have the adversary running rampant with his false Messiah on the earth and the true Messiah in heaven getting ready to return and take over. The dragon assumes his power base in the environs of the earth. He becomes the ruler of the powers of the air. In fact, saying that he has no authority. Ultimately, everyone on the earth will worship him except those who are written in the book of life belonging to the Lamb slaughtered before the world was founded. It was a done deal going in. And those that are sealed to God are the ones written in this book of life. If anyone isn't sealed to God and written in the Lamb books of life, they are worshiping Satan, if not overtly. Yeshua said, "He who is not with me is against me." Matthew 12:30 being quoted there. Yeshua said, "He who is not with me is against me." That's pretty cut and dried. This is looking at spiritual warfare, its greatest intensity, really raised to its highest level in the final days, being played out openly across the entire earth. Satan is backed into a corner. Satan, when he was the premier angel of God, could go anywhere in God's creation. Now he is no longer able to roam anywhere in God's creation, rather being held confined to the earth only. And as that takes place, he becomes determined to take as much of God's creation as he can down with him as he goes. This section on the description of the first beast, the false Messiah, closes with, "Those that have ears, let them hear." Everyone on earth will worship the false Messiah except those that are written in the book of life of the Lamb slaughtered before the world was founded. Those that have ears, let them hear. If we are all listening, pay attention to what has just been said about the false Messiah. Focus on it. It has to do with our eternal life. there's also this warning about what is to happen in the physical life. This is the physical life. God is not concerned with our physical comfort as He is with our eternal well-being. Look back at Matthew 24, 9 through 13. At that time you will be arrested and handed over to be punished and put to death, and all peoples will hate you because of me. At that time many will be trapped into betraying and hating each other. Many false prophets will appear and fool many people, and many people's love will grow cold because of increased distance from Torah. But whoever holds out till the end will be delivered. Remember, this does not necessarily mean our physical life. This is when God's people, though, must persevere and trust. Now, during this same period, the false Messiah will have an accomplice that we commonly refer to as a false prophet. During this time, this last 3.5 years, the false Messiah will have an accomplice that we commonly refer to as the false prophet. His description begins in Revelation 13:11, so we're going to read 13:11 through 14a, if you will, please. But it will provide an opportunity for us to bear witness. So make up your minds not to worry, rehearsing your defense beforehand, for I myself will give you an eloquence and a wisdom that no adversary will be able to resist or refute. You will be betrayed by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends. Some of you they will have put to death. Everyone will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will be lost. By standing firm, you will save your lives. Wow. Remember, this doesn't necessarily mean our physical life. But this is a time when God's people must persevere and trust. Understand. I'm going to put Revelation 13:11 through 14 back up, because I want us to see that we're going to have another beast coming up on the earth. 2 horns like those of the lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercises the authority of the first beast. The first beast is the false Messiah. This is the false prophet. It makes the earth and the inhabitants worship the first beast. The second beast, the false prophet's job is to get people to worship the false Messiah, the one whose fatal wound has been healed, which got him established as being the false Messiah. The false prophet, performs great miracles, causing fire to come down from heaven onto earth as people watch. It deceives the people living on earth by its miracles, which it is allowed to perform in the presence of the false Messiah. Fascinating, isn't it? He's second only to the false Messiah, has all the authority of the false Messiah, but only through the false Messiah. Only in the presence of the false Messiah. Only because of the presence of the false Messiah can he have any authority. Like Satan, the false Messiah can only be in one place and do one thing at a time. Any given time, there's a limit to created beings. This second beast, the false prophet, is a further delegation of authority, the chain of command of the adversary, the king of the group. The chain of command is increased. We have the false Messiah, who is now confined to the earth, can go no place else. He has brought up a false Messiah who is being believed by a huge number of people on the earth as being the actual true Messiah. And the third in this chain of command is a false prophet who will have incredible power. All of the authority of the false Messiah, when he's in the presence of the false Messiah and subject to the wishes of the false Messiah, who is really nothing but a puppet of Satan. A puppet of Satan. The false Messiah will look like a lamb, perhaps give the appearance of a very religious person, pious to a fault, but he will speak like a dragon. Thought comes to me, if you will, that we see that in the radical Muslim clerics today, we see the same thing in radical Muslim clerics today. Pious, looking pious to a fault, but speaking like a dragon. To those that follow their faith, those that follow Islam, the imams have an appearance of being very religious persons. They have appearance of eyes of many who don't follow Islam, who look at them and say, oh, this is a very religious person, but look at their rhetoric. They sound like a dragon. Death to the interval. Death to the infidel. Death to the great Satan America. Death to the little Satan Israel. Fellow Arabs, mortar yourself in the great cause. Worship only Allah. I think this is what we'll see in the false prophet. Looks religious, looks pious, speaks like a dragon. The false prophet is specific things that he will do. It will make the inhabitants of the world worship the false Messiah, the one whose fatal wound was healed, who is the Savior of the world that was presented by Satan. In effect here, we have now introduced a false god, Satan, a false Messiah, and now a false prophet who is bringing the word of the false god and the false Messiah to a deceived world. That's going to be taking place as we get down to that last 3.5 years. We've got the false prophet acting as the one through which the deceived world is enlightened. He will cause the entire world to worship the false prophet, all except those that are sealed to God, written in the Lamb's Book of Life. How will they do this? Through deceptive miracles. Through deceptive miracles. Even calling down fire from heaven in the manner of Elijah the prophet. Elijah called down fire to destroy the prophets of Baal. The false prophet will call down fire in a perversion of that event. Something to consider is the closeness of Elijah to God. Elijah was so close to God that God took him directly to himself in a chariot of fire. The false prophet may just have that same kind of closeness to Satan. That same kind of closeness to Satan that Elijah had to God. That may be the source of all of his empowerment. I'm going to pause here because we've run out of time. We'll pick this up here next week with verse 13 as we go forward from this.